Yes. Thanks. Well, let me just put it back to full screen. So you can see and hear me, right? Right. Good. By the way, thanks a lot. The sound is perfect today. So I don't know how did you do that, but it's really perfect today. So we can hear everything. And thanks for this fantastic workshop. I'm really sorry for not being able to be with you like physically, but luckily we still know how to use Zoom, and we can take advantage of that. Yes, today so workshop is called Epistemic blame theory and practice, right? So my talk would be, I guess, on the far end of theory side. It's really as idealized epistemology as you can get it. So I'm sorry about that, but then again, I believe there is maybe something interesting about it. The topic is degrees of blameworthiness, and I would like to focus on a puzzle, like a puzzle that seems to arise when you take seriously the thought that blameworthiness comes in degrees. Without further ado, so here is a puzzle. First assumption that seems plausible when you think about blameworthiness, like in a purely theoretical setting, is to say that like blameworthiness just is explained by when it's fitting or appropriate for someone to blame someone. More specifically, we can say satisfying, be it action, attitude, or whatever, is blameworthy with respect to S1, the blamer, if and only if it is fitting or appropriate for S1 to blame S for fying. It seems quite natural to describe blameworthiness in these theoretical terms. On the other hand, that also seems that in some cases S is fying, S1's fying is more blameworthy than S2 fying, G. And fying and G can be the same, and S1 and S2 can be the same person, by the way. So it does seem that we talk that way, and we will see some examples later on. But note already that there is this tension. If we think that fittingness or appropriateness doesn't come in degrees, there doesn't seem to be any degree involved in fying's compliance with a norm or standard or the aim. Right? Think about inappropriate remark or fitting fear. It just is fitting or just is inappropriate to occur without involving any apparent degrees. Now the puzzle is that, as I said, fittingness is understood in terms of compliance with a norm, and compliance doesn't come in degrees. So how do we explain this puzzle? So first thing that we want to do is, I guess, minimize costs for the solution of the puzzle. And I think that the most theoretically costly solution would be straightforward denial of one or other of these initial assumptions without plausible error theory, right? Why is that? Well, think about blame, especially in emotional. If we understand blaming in emotional by appeals to emotions, it certainly can be fitting, and if so, then what else could a blameworthy fying be if not fying that is fitting to blame? And on the other hand, our like massive practice, massive data from our ordinary ways of talking seem to indicate that we do conceive blameworthiness as coming in degrees. So like straightforward solution denial of one of these has this massive cost of explaining these intuitions. So now I put already here a tentative solution, a solution that I would like to elaborate in this talk today, which is which has its costs, but I think it kind of minimizes the costs of this puzzle. And the solution is that, strictly speaking, we should say that blameworthiness doesn't admit of degrees. It might sound as a bad thing to go, and it might sound as if I'm contradicting myself with just what I just said. But hold on, the idea here is that we are just saying that, strictly speaking, blameworthiness doesn't come in degrees, right? So if we look on comparative judgments and linguistic expressions, what this solution tells us is that talk of comparative blameworthiness involves linguistic coercion, or so-called loose talk. It's akin to talk of degrees of blameworthiness is very similar on this picture to the talk of to saying things like train leaves at 5 p.m. while you know that it actually, more specifically, it leaves at 5 and 3 minutes. There's nothing bad, so to say, in this assertion. You do say the train leaves at 5 p.m. Even though you know that, strictly speaking, it doesn't. So I would like to say that something similar happens with degrees of, with our talk of degrees of blameworthiness. But also I would like to stress, and this will be the main part of this talk, that it does make sense to talk about comparative blameworthiness if we understand this comparative blameworthiness as depending on certain pragmatic factors, our interests and goals in particular. So I will try to respect both intuitions, even though I do deny the initial premise that blameworthiness comes in degrees. How do I avoid ad hocness objection? The idea here is that, well, it is to offer an account which has an independent theoretical motivation, and it involves two parts. And here I will focus mainly on the second part. First part would be to rely on a framework in linguistics of gradable adjectives, on which the apparent gradability of blameworthiness is very different from gradability involved in paradigmatic cases of gradable adjectives such as tall, rich, and so on. And arguably that this apparent gradability is not gradability strictly speaking, but pragmatic gradability within this linguistic framework. So this would be the background theory that could vindicate my picture, which I will just mention but not go into details here. More importantly, I would like to explain why exactly, actually, and how apparent comparative blameworthiness still makes sense, even though it's strictly speaking, blameworthiness doesn't come in degrees. This will be the main task of today. So that was about the first leg. So that how exactly it goes, so the second point, the point on which I will focus in the reminder here, is to say that I will suggest that comparative statements of blameworthiness track the degrees of resilience of good patterns of blame producing sequences. I will explain it more in details, but already note that good here is understood in fittingness preserving terms, and by blame producing sequences I understand roots of reasoning broadly understood, transition from emotions cognitive basis to blaming attitude on the basis of cognitive basis. To give an example involving a different emotion, you see a dog with big teeth, that's your cognitive basis, and you move from this cognitive basis to fearing the dog. That's the root. That's what I will understand by this emotion producing sequence, and I apply this to blame. and crucially, well, yes, and these sequences can be good or bad, namely fittingness preserving or not. And crucially, the degrees of resilience that I will talk about correspond to comparative normalcy. And judgments of comparative normalcy may depend partially on pragmatic factors or interests, aims, and goals. So there is a lot in here, but I prefer to put my view up front, and then we elaborate it later on. So that's a picture I would like to defend. So few clarifications, then I skip the second part, and then otherwise it will be a kind of difficult kind of 3-hour talk if I go through it all. But let's skip the linguistics bit, and then I go to the positive proposal straight away. Clarifications. Of course, we are not here in the business of comparing the importance of underlying norms, right? There's a trivial sense in which we can compare blameworthy findings. Some underlying norms seem to be more important for us, right? Don't murder versus don't call names, right? I'm not here in this business. I mean, sure, there is this sense of the importance of blameworthiness, but that's not what I'm interested in here. So this like kind of our possibility of ranking these norms merely shows that some instances of norm breaking are more important for us than other instances of norm breaking, right? This doesn't show that breaking a norm or complying with a norm or rule or standard or aim comes in degrees. This doesn't show that being blameworthy, the status itself, comes in degrees. As I said, I'm working with emotion theory of blame, but I'm open to other views, and I hope that there is a way to adapt what I say to other views. If not, please tell me. I also first work with a puzzle of blameworthiness in general, and then I focus a bit at the very end on epistemic blameworthiness. Hopefully the solution is general enough. And I will not do it here, but it's important that if what I say is on the right track, maybe we have here also a nice story of how blamelessness might differ from justification in this degree like gradable sense, right? Like apparent degradability of blameworthiness might be quite different from apparent gradability of justification. Also, another crucial thing to remember, a distinction to make, is that I want to distinguish someone being blameworthy for fying and someone else standing to blame for that person for fying, right? We might not stand to blame A for various reasons. Maybe we are blameworthy ourselves, or we're not like just. Who are we? But it still might be the case that the person is blameworthy, right? I want to distinguish this because this is, I think, an important distinction to make. What exactly determines appropriate standing to blame is beyond the scope of the present discussion, I think. So now I skip the linguistic bit. I just read one or two examples to if anyone is not convinced that we do talk about blameworthiness in greed sense. Here are two, like some examples from internet, which seem to be okay. I mean, I'm not English native speaker, but I mean, correct me if you find that this completely bad, but that's what people write on web, like in like newspapers. Like I just read two examples. The evidence didn't clearly distinguish which players were more blameworthy than others. Another example, deliberate indifference is not an easy standard to meet. It is a mental state more blameworthy than just negligence, closer to criminal recklessness. So I skip all the tests, all the different distinctions, which will be in the paper, but not in the talk. We can go back to that in the Q&A, but now the main idea of of degrees of resilience. So S is being blameworthy for fying with respect to blamer, which might be purely theoretical position, is roughly, or maybe idealized version of S, or however we conceive it. Again, it's an idealized epistemology. I don't want to take stance on like practice of blaming. So with respect to S1 is roughly as being such that it is appropriate or fitting for S1 to blame S for fying. Now we add here a possible background picture, comparative reasons view. Simply put, then, more blameworthy just is being such that there are weightier reasons to blame, right? Blameworthiness in terms of fittingness, but more blameworthy in terms of weightier reasons to blame. Wait, what happened? Right, yeah. Now, once more, the view that I would like to defend with respect to comparative blameworthiness is that, and from this view, we can deduce a view about degrees, the nature of degrees of blameworthiness, is that for any S and any fying, A is more blameworthy for fying with respect to S, the blamer, than B is if and only if the pattern of blame producing sequence from initial responses to blaming A relative to S is more resilient to defeaters than the pattern of blame producing sequence that concludes in blaming B is relevant, is like, yeah, is relative to S. Okay, so there's a lot here. Let me to unpack this. Let me go to a theory of reasons. So, on my view, normative reasons are appropriate answers to why questions. But what is crucial for our purposes here, some why questions ask for as responses for premises and good arguments or patterns of reasoning broadly understood. And in this, so patterns of reasoning broadly understood, including perceptual belief producing sequences and crucially emotion producing sequences. But crucially for us, in this sense, I rely here on so-called reasoning views of reasons. In particular, I will work with the version in Jonathan Way and Conor McHugh, Way 2017 and McHugh 2016. And let me now briefly make a detour to their view of reasons, reasoning view. I mean, I'm not, as I said, I'm not endorsing their view. I'm just taking the best, I think, aspects of their view. Namely, I'm just saying that some normative reasons are reasoning reasons as they understand it. And so here's how they understand reasons. The general definition is as the following one: for that P to be a reason for a response is for that P to be a premise of a good pattern of reasoning from fitting responses to that response. Okay, few clarifications. Good pattern of reasoning is fittingness preserving transitions from premise responses to the conclusion responses on the basis of the premise response. So there is a transition from two states, a transition which is based on the initial state, right? It's important that we get to the endpoint on the basis of the initial state. And good pattern of reasoning is such that it preserves fittingness. What is fittingness? That's left undefined. Supposedly, we kind of have a intuitive grasp of which states are fitting and what our fittingness condition. Well, what is a fitting response? Best example, I think, is in the case of belief. True belief seem to be a fitting belief. Good intention seem to be good fitting intention. Good in the sense like morally good, or whatever our theory of morality is, and so on. Okay, fitting emotions, fitting fear is a fear felt in presence of danger. Fitting anger is anger felt in the presence of an offense, a real offense, a genuine offense, and so on. Okay, and now a fittingness preserving transition is such that you start with if you give a fitting initial state, then you get as a fitting output state, right? Think about deductive reasoning, and that's why I said that this is like hyper idealized view here. Like, think about deductive reasoning as a paradigm here. You have a valid reasoning, and we define it in the sense as if you give me a true premise, I get you a true conclusion. Here we have something similar, but hold on, it's not purely deductive. The understanding of fittingness preserving is not purely deductive here. So there is a catch here, but I will say it in a while. So another precision is that we are focusing here really on abstracta, on possible patterns, right? It's not necessarily that the subject who has the reason actually possess all premise responses, right? Maybe let's say I don't know, I have no, I'm not aware at all that there is this drowning child just next to me. That the kid is drowning is still a reason for me to save him, because there is a good pattern of reasoning from a potential premise response that I could have, namely this belief that there is a drowning kid, together with my actual intention to help people when in need or something like that. And there is this good pattern of reasoning from these initial sets, which are not all necessarily for me to give us. Okay, that's their view. Now, before going to degrees of reasons, we have to talk about outweigh for reasoning reasons, right? How can natural question to reasoning view is how can there be outweighed reasons or any weight at all in the case of reasoning reasons? And here is a trick is the following one. First, we admit that there is a ceteris paribus clause in good patterns of reasoning, and the good patterns of reasoning can be defeated. That was a hatch, like a not completely focusing on deductive reasoning here. There is a ceteris paribus clause on good patterns of reasoning. Think about my transition from fitting response, premise response, belief, say that there is light at Jacques' place, to the conclusion response, my belief that Jacques is at home. Sorry, there are so many typos. Is at home, and this transition corresponds to a good yet defeasible pattern of reasoning. Okay, so for instance, it's defeated when Jacques forgot to turn the light off in this case, right? But still, the reasoning would be good even in the case where the ceteris paribus clause kicks in. Second part of the trick of accounting for outweighed reasons is to say that in cases where reason R1, let's say 2 phi 1, which is distinct response from the response phi 2, outweighs reason 2 to phi 2, the pattern of reasoning from premise response with R1 and other initial premise responses to phi is not defeated, even after adding R2 and other premises, presumably as additional premise responses in one's pattern of reasoning. While the reverse is not the case. Okay, take the case of promise versus saving someone. So here I just read the example from Way. For example, in Ross' case, it is not good reasoning to move from the belief that you promised to meet your friend to doing so, given the belief that you will thereby leave someone to die. But it is good reasoning to move from the belief that by staying here, you can save a life, to staying here, even given the belief that by doing so, you will break a promise. This is what it is for the pattern of reasoning, which concludes in saving the life to defeat the pattern, concluding in keeping your premise, and so forth. The reason to save the life to outweigh the reason to keep the promise. Okay, so the idea is like the two patterns. One is defeated just in case, one is outweighed just in case if you take the premises from the other pattern, it's still good, but not the reverse. And from this conception of outweight, you can naturally generalize a conception of weight of reasons. Okay, and here weight of reasons just is the resilience of the corresponding good pattern of reasoning to being defeated. Take R1, the injured needs my help to survive, and this is intuitively a weightier reason to stay and help than R2, that helping will make me feel better. Why is that so? Well, the idea here is that the pattern from premise response with R1 as content plus other relevant premise responses to the intentional reaction of helping the injured is more resilient to being defeated than the pattern from premise response with R2 as content plus other premise responses to helping the injured. Okay, we keep the assuming that R1 world is not R2 world. Okay, so how do we understand more resilient? Easy gloss, less easily defeated. One idea that I tried somewhere is that more resilient patterns require adding more premises to be defeated, but I think it's not plausible. Like, it's not about numbers of premises, it's really about the weight of other premises, premise responses. So I would say that it's really less easily defeated. Just defeat is farther away from normal worlds, right? So we bring in something like normalcy condition on resilience to defeat, a la Martin Smith 2016, and roughly understood, we could say something like the R1 pattern is more resilient than the R2 pattern because a world where there is a defeater for this pattern, so R1 pattern, is farther away normalcy-wise than the world where there is a defeater for R2 pattern. Again, where R2 world is not also R1 world. So going back to our main question, we apply weight of reason, this theory of weight of reasoning reasons to emotions, and we again interpret blame as an emotion, and we say that degrees of blameworthiness can be captured in terms of degree of resilience of good blame producing sequence. Okay, reasoning broadly understood. As I said already, right, I think I already said what I understand as blame producing sequence. You start with a cognitive basis and you end with blaming. I skip this long quote. It might be interesting if anyone has questions about these sequences thing. People in philosophy of emotions do seem to think in terms of transitions from cognitive basis to emotions as potential source of justification for emotions. Here is a quote from Santiago Echeverry, recent paper. Okay, so now we get to the end. So I just give you the example, unpacking the view. So take the case, take R1 to be that S didn't help the injured, but easily could have, and R2 that S didn't respect a promise to meet a friend for a coffee. The pattern of blame anger here in particular, I guess, the pattern of blame producing sequence from A's cognitive basis to blame anger at S for not helping is more resilient than the pattern of blame producing sequence from A's cognitive basis to blame anger response at S for not respecting her promise. And what's it? So what does it mean? It means that the world where there is a defeater for the former is farther away normalcy-wise than the world where there is a defeater for the latter. Okay, so in a nutshell, the idea is that it would be very surprising or abnormal to have a defeater like for the ceteris paribus clause to kick in for my transition of blaming the person who didn't help the injured. then it is sorry, I mixed two terms. So in short, it would be very surprising, abnormal to have a defeater for the former, but not so abnormal to have a defeater for the latter. Okay, so it would be easy to have defeater for the transition from my knowledge about a friend to meet her over coffee, but it would be less abnormal. It would be very abnormal to have a defeater for not blaming someone who didn't help the injured person. That's the idea. Now, what is epistemic blameworthiness in all that? And I have exactly 1 minute 30 seconds to tell you something about that. The idea here is a degree of blameworthiness of a belief corresponds to the degree of resilience of the relevant pattern of epistemic blame producing sequence with respect to relevant belief. Right? Let me illustrate this with an example. Think about my French friend who chooses deliberately to rely exclusively on Russia today on geopolitical matters and forms a belief about Eastern Europe on that basis. It seems intuitively that he is more blameworthy for his belief than some members of my extended family for whom it is physically almost impossible to access anything else than Russia today, and who form a belief about Eastern Europe matters on that basis, right? I hope you share my intuition here that there is this apparent degree of blameworthiness, different degrees of blameworthiness involved, specifically about the beliefs. Now, what's happening here is that it seems that the pattern of blame producing sequence in the former case, my French friend, is more blaming my French friend is more resilient than the pattern in the latter case. Okay, the idea is here to defeat the former pattern, we need to move to a less normal world, a far less normal world than what we need to defeat the latter blame. Okay, imagine that it is actually it's actually impossible for my family to access anything beyond Russia today, and that would be like sufficient to defeat the blame pattern for my extended family, right? And that world, well, it's actually impossible for them to access anything beyond Russia today. In my judgment, is not so far away, not so abnormal than the world in which my French friend could not access anything else than Russia today. And so here is a pragmatic aspect of normalcy, pragmatic aspect that explains our comparative judgments. The idea here is that normalcy judgments must depend on practical factors. What we judge to be a more or less surprising possibility or abnormal world might depend on what's important to us practically, right? So working out the details how exactly pragmatic factors influence our normalcy judgments goes beyond the scope of this discussion, but consider again the Russia Today beliefs. One story here is that maybe the world in which my extended family cannot even access anything else than Russia Today seems not so surprising to me, partly perhaps because I'm having a very pessimistic mindset, tendency to see the bad as more normal. Perhaps I desire that they don't believe Russia Today so badly that it would cost me a lot of emotional distress if they actually have no way of not forming Russia Today beliefs. To avoid the emotional distress, I have the tendency to suppress any hope and not even see the possibility of them not forming the Russia Today beliefs as a genuine option. So that's why the impossibility seems to be a closed world. Okay, so to recap in exactly 5 seconds, the problem of degree blameworthiness is that to be blameworthy is explained in terms of being of fitting blame. However, fittingness doesn't come in degrees. However, blameworthiness do seem to be graded. Solution, actually, it's not, strictly speaking. Pragmatic factors explain the apparent gradability, and loose talk as well explains that. Positive proposal, degrees of apparent blameworthiness tied to degrees of resilience of good patterns of blame producing sequences. Resilience explained in terms of comparative normalcy, and finally, judgments of comparative normalcy involve pragmatic factors. So that's it. Thank you so much.